Hi YouTube, Darth here. This is Yes or No, a weapon review series where I give a clear and concise answer as to what weapons you should be using in Battlefield. Today's Battlefield 4 weapon review is the AWS Light Machine Gun, also called the Ares Shrike. A favorite after it arrived in the Naval Strike DLC, it was once called the best LMG and was often called overpowered. It's since received some major revisions with patches in Battlefield 4 which might change your thinking about this gun. So should you be using the AWS? Yes or no? No. Post-DICE LA patches, this weapon sits in a somewhat strange place. It's not quite accurate enough to compete with the long-range LMGs, and not quite damaging enough to compete with the big caliber LMGs. And there's basically one weapon that does nearly everything the AWS does, but better, which I'll talk about a little bit later. For now, let's talk about what this weapon is good at. The AWS has the third highest rate of fire among the LMGs at 780 rounds per minute. This allows the AWS to send quite a few rounds downrange before needing to reload. And when you need to reload, you'll have the fastest non-magazine reload of the LMGs. At just 3.35 seconds with a round in the chamber and 4.7 without, the reload times on this weapon are comparatively pretty fast to some of the box-fed LMGs, which are typically in excess of 5 seconds. Otherwise, it's a painfully average weapon, and I say painful because there are really only a couple of guidelines for LMGs in Battlefield 4. LMGs either deliver a lot of punishment like the M240B, are long range like the U100, accurate in the mid-range like the MG4, or they are strange hybrids like the RPK-74. The AWS struggles to find its place among those as it's a hybrid, but it doesn't have enough accuracy or punching power to put it in competition. So with that out of the way, let's transition to the not so good of this weapon. At 580 meters per second, the AWS has the lowest bullet velocity of all the LMGs. In close quarters, you won't feel this quite as much, but if you start looking at leading targets, it can become quite the detraction to try and lead your shots while attempting to keep 5 or more bullets on target. Every LMG in Battlefield 4 is better than the AWS in this respect. With a minimum time to kill of 310 milliseconds, the AWS falls in the dead middle of DPS between the more accurate weapons, which are slower, and the more powerful weapons that are faster or higher caliber. Even at face value, this means that there are several LMGs that are potentially better than it. Unfortunately, the AWS has neither competitive firepower nor accuracy, and I'll illustrate this in a graph in a moment. So let's take a look at why this gun isn't quite that amazing. I put it up against a good spread of competing LMGs from the M249 to the RPK. As you can see, the AWS is not terribly accurate for starters, and combined with its middle tier damage output, it quickly falls behind and stays behind of the pack. Even if you prize rate of fire over accuracy, this weapon is still beat by the MG4, though it does beat out the non-competitive M249. And that's pretty much the biggest death blow to the AWS, is that the MG4 does everything the AWS does better. More ammo per reload, better average time to kill, better time to kill when accounting for accuracy, faster bullet velocity, and the list goes on. In just about every way, the MG4 is a superior weapon, and like the M249, the AWS struggles to find a place to call its own. By suggestion, I've included a small segment on how to unlock the AWS. First, you're going to need the Naval Strike DLC and be at least Soldier Rank 10. Then, it's simply a matter of completing the Swiss cheese assignment. Doing that requires that you get 3 LMG ribbons, accomplished by killing 6 players 3 times with any LMG, and destroying 3 vehicles as support. Destroying 3 vehicles can be accomplished by C4ing them while they are doing something dumb. Try to sneak up on them while they're distracted, or simply pile a bunch of Jeep stuff into a Jeep and send it their way. I wouldn't be surprised if this destruction requirement could also be accomplished while tanking or flying as support. You'll have to check your assignments or battle log to be sure. As for controlling the recoil, the AWS isn't a particularly difficult beast. With a modest recoil of 0.35 degrees up, 0.25 degrees left, and 0.38 right, and a 1.4 first shot recoil multiplier, the AWS's general pattern will go up and to the right. This is relatively easy to control, as you just need to pull down and to the left. LMGs have a slightly higher maximum aim spread, and you're going to notice this the longer you hold down your fire. If you're trying to hit a ranged target with a fire hose, you're going to have some pretty poor luck when it comes to the AWS and spraying. With a spread increase per shot of 0.104 degrees, the weapon's not the most inaccurate in the LMG category, but you will have to take some care to not hold down the fire hose. The AWS needs 5 rounds to kill out to 48 meters, and beyond that you'll need 6 or more. Combined with its average damage output, that means that long kill shots are probably going to require a lot of patience. The AWS is not quite the room broom you might be thinking it is. It used to be compared to the Ace-23 but having more bullets, which it really was not far off from being. Now, however, it's serviceable for killing several targets without having to reload, but fails to outperform several weapons, especially in close quarters. With the AWS, I have found myself having to compensate for this lack of damage by attempting to go for more headshots than I typically do. If you compare the AWS with good positioning, you can find yourself with a lot of ammo and a relatively accurate weapon. You're not always going to get good flanks in Battlefield 4, so the best strategy with the AWS would be to run with another squad mate, as you can provide better supporting fire than you can direct fire, especially in close quarters or 15 meters or less. This is because the AWS is definitely not king in engagements under 15 meters, though it is somewhat viable from 15 meters and out depending on your accuracy. On larger maps with sparse clutter, for example Hangar 21 or Giants of Karelia, you're going to have a really hard time getting traction with the AWS. It has very little killing power at long range and has such low bullet velocity that you're going to be about as lethal as buzzing flies. If you get caught in the open, there's no turning on enemies to kill them. You've got a weapon that simply isn't scary enough to make them hide. But you'll probably get the most traction on maps like Zavad and Lockers, where there can be a good mix of both close quarters and mid-range combat. But still, there are a lot of other LMGs that you should be considering that are far more potent. The AWS is yet another gun that has some oddly okay base stats that don't receive major upgrades from particular attachments. I initially was running this gun with a heavy barrel and a stubby to try to get some more accuracy out of the weapon, but that proved to be somewhat a detraction as the upwards recoil starts to get heavy. So I consulted my trusty method of seeing what the most popular loadouts on BF4stats.com were. Most of the top AWS players preferred running the gun with no barrel, which gave me a hint to try a better approach, an attachment approach that I think actually works pretty well and makes the gun more competitive. So what did I end up using? For my optic, I usually run with the Holo 1X or the HD33. To be honest, I find the HD33 slightly less obtrusive than the Holo with about the same effect. The AWS is not a close quarters blaster, so the red dot sights don't seem quite as attractive to me. For my accessory, I had started with the green laser, but eventually switched back to the red laser. Now this is purely perception, but I feel like the green laser being less common strikes the eye and is slightly more catching. This made me feel like I was easier to spot. Emphasis on feel. Now you're free to use whatever you prefer, but hipfire in the AWS always has slightly better performance than the box magazine LMGs, and the laser is a good pair to this tactic. For the barrel, I went with the compensator. Now, I might normally run with a heavy barrel for weapons under 800 rounds per minute. I found the compensator pair with my grip gave the AWS a nice little accuracy bump, good enough to make it an alright weapon. Now, the compensator does give a little bit more spread per shot and max spread, but the general performance beats the naked barrel. This seems like a better trade than higher upwards recoil in this gun's case, and just helped me land so many more headshots in close quarters. Now for my grip, I ran with the potato or stubby grip. Again, this choice is about dialing in the accuracy of this weapon. Paired with the compensator, the potato helps to offset the overall spread increase of the weapon per shot. It's a great combo for most weapons that are 800 rounds per minute and up, and it works great on the AWS even though it's just 780. I noticed a pretty remarkable improvement over the heavy barrel here, and my data tells me it is superior to the naked barrel, so I definitely can't complain. Now, if you'd like to run the AWS with a suppressor, you're definitely giving up the range capability of this weapon. The bullet velocity drops to 330 meters per second, but it does give you a better fighting chance in extreme close quarters, as long as you can get the drop on your enemies. The AWS is another weapon that people have some interesting perceptions about. I think the fact that it was heralded as the best and most overpowered weapon in the game keeps it popular. And it's certainly not awful, it just doesn't have anything that makes it stand out. And there are a lot of other LMGs that you could be using with better general performance. One of those weapons is the MG4. At a fast-firing 800 rounds per minute, it's certainly forgiving and is quite competitive with the big caliber LMGs like the PKP. If you're looking to upgrade your AWS, this would be my first recommendation for you, as it shares a lot of the same characteristics with better overall performance. Oh yeah, and it has a 200 round box mag for even more butter. If you're in an experimental mood, you could definitely try out the RPK-74M. It's not fast firing, so you're going to have to watch the accuracy of your shots. But it is an accuracy machine and has far more killing power than some of the other high accuracy LMGs. I did a yes or no on the RPK-74M, so you may wish to check that out for additional tips for that weapon. That's it for this episode of Yes or No. If there's something you think I missed, or if you have a particularly different take on the AWS, please let me know in the comments below. If you've got a weapon you'd like me to review for Battlefield, also let me know, as I do keep a running tally of these things. If you like what you saw, be sure to force choke that like button. If you're new around here, check out my channel and consider sticking around with a subscribe. And as always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time, YouTube.